Citizens of humanity, hello and welcome to LiterASIAN 2021, Global Asian. And today's event, it's a beautiful neighborhood, Chinatown Pretty by Andria Lo and Valerie Luu. My name is Eric Lee, and I serve as the Vice President of Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, ACWW. Our organization was founded in 1996. We are headquartered in Vancouver's historic Chinatown, on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, all my relations. Our work has developed and nurtured generations of Asian Canadian writers, a historically marginalized group in Canada whose stories were rarely documented. Currently, we operate Rice Paper Magazine, serving a world audience, the Jim Wong Chu Emerging Writers Award. There's Jim right there. And passionately hold community building programs such as our annual LiterASIAN Festival. This year's theme is Global Asian. Our festival started as the only Asian Canadian Writers Festival in North America, which has now adapted globally by overcoming the challenges of the pandemic. This event would not have been possible without the excellence exerted by our volunteers, Festival Coordinator Sophie Monk, our partners and sponsors, and most importantly of all, you, our audience. So thank you. It is my honor to be here today with you all. Thank you for joining us. And now, Allan Cho, our Executive Director and today's moderator for today's event. Allan?
Great. Thank you, Eric. Really appreciate it. Welcome, everyone, to our event today. Welcome, Andrea, and also Valerie to this wonderful session here today. Before we begin, I want to say that we're thinking of you, Edwin Lee. Edwin is currently in the hospital, and he's a longtime friend of the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop. Edwin is battling, so I just want to share with everyone that we're thinking of you, Edwin, and we hope you get well soon. And also want to say that we're also thinking of you, June. June was originally the moderator of today's session, but because of an emergency she has to attend to, she couldn't make it. So I'm filling in and trying to do the best I can. But June's pain, we feel it together. So we're all thinking of you too, June. So I want to give an introduction to our authors today of the book Chinatown Pretty, Valerie Luu and Andria Lo. Chinatown Pretty is a storytelling project founded by Andria Lo and Valerie Luu that documents senior citizens' street style in Chinatowns. Now, what qualifies as Chinatown Pretty? It combines urban utilitarianism with unexpected sartorial choices that reveal resilience, personal histories, and cultural values. Now, since 2014, they've photographed and interviewed hundreds of seniors in historic Chinatowns across North America. The project is not only a celebration of this unique style, but a way to share seniors' immigration stories and well-earned wisdoms. This book was published in the fall of 2020 by Chronicle Books. Now, Valerie is a journalist and one half of the Vietnamese pop-up restaurant Rock Paper Scissors. She lives in San Francisco. Andrea, raised in Alaska and Texas, is a freelance editorial and commercial photographer now based in San Francisco Bay Area. She has a background in studio art with a degree from the University of California, Berkeley. Whether it's capturing portraits on location or products in the studio, Andrea brings a design-forward approach and calm presence to any project with specialties including product and creative still life, food culture, skincare and beauty, lifestyle, and portraiture. So without further ado, I want to hand the stage over to Andrea and Valerie.
Thanks for that lovely intro, Allan. Before we begin, we'd like to do a land acknowledgement for San Francisco Chinatown, where we started our project. So we acknowledge that San Francisco Chinatown is located on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. And with that, I am Andrea, the photographer with Chinatown Pretty.
And I'm Valerie Luu, I'm the writer behind Chinatown Pretty.
And I'm gonna go ahead and start our visuals. So yes, thank you for having us. We are so thankful to be here, and we would love to share our love of Chinatowns and the resilient, beautiful people who inhabit and make it a special place. So what is Chinatown Pretty? It's a photo and storytelling project that celebrates the street style and the lives of senior citizens in historic Chinatowns across North America. Seniors are really the heartbeat of the neighborhood. So you'll see them out and about grocery shopping on the daily. They're using parks as their living room, as seen here. They're exercising and socializing. And their eclectic fashion is really fun, but it's also a lens to learn about the people of the neighborhood, their backstories and immigration journeys, as well as a peek into their daily lives. So a little bit about Chinatown Pretty style. You might have seen it or recognize it. It combines very practical clothes with some unexpected twists. So it's a mix, and it's a flurry of patterns, often bold florals, old and new clothes, a lot of handmade and gifted elements, and lots of layers, accessorized with a lot of sun protection. And since 2014, we photographed and interviewed several hundred seniors and have traveled to some of the largest Chinatowns, including locally to us, San Francisco and Oakland, as well as Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, and of course, Vancouver. So about our story and how this project came to be, Valerie and I first met in the food world about 10 years ago. I work as a freelance photographer, and I was documenting a lot of the underground food scene in San Francisco at the time, and Valerie was running her own food business.
Yeah, so I started a pop-up Vietnamese restaurant called Rice Paper Scissors with Katie Guan, who's pictured there in the corner. And a lot of these photos, you know, we're really lucky to have Andrea take over the course of our 10-year business. And yeah, we're a pop-up Vietnamese restaurant, so we set up in different locations. But with COVID, we decided to kind of pivot, and now we just sell hats that say fish sauce on it. But a little bit about the Chinatown Pretty origin story. So we started in 2014 when Andrea and I would go on dim sum dates in San Francisco, Chinatown. You know, and we both noticed this very distinct style. A lot of layers, colors, patterns, and we both had a very visceral reaction to it. Our eyes would grow wide and our hearts would start to race, and we'd be like, oh my God, did you see that? And so we wanted to learn, like, how did these senior citizens compose their outfits? And more importantly, where'd they get their shoes? And at first we were really into the outfits, but then we learned that clothes can be a gateway to learn more about the senior citizens' stories. So what they did before they retired, where they immigrated from. And at the heart of it is also connecting with our grandparents' generation. Andrea and I are second and a half generation Asian American, and we saw a lot of our own family histories kind of reflected in their diaspora, in their careers, and how they live their lives. And in a lot of ways, this project is a love letter to Chinatown and allows us to connect with this generation despite cultural and language barriers. And the senior citizens are really the heart of the neighborhood. You know, they're the ultimate urban dwellers. You see them in the parks, on the bus, eating yum cha or getting yum cha. And I feel like they're hashtag out there. You know, they're not Netflix and chillin'. They really utilize public space. They shop local. They get to get best groceries at the markets every day. And this project is a love letter to those active lifestyles that they lead, and of course, their style. And we want to share a bit about our approach. So since 2014, we've been hitting the pavement in Chinatowns across North America. And we start out by just, you know, we see something we like or someone we like. For example, that woman has a great magenta hat. We would try to catch up with them. Usually they walk faster than we can. So we're like running up and saying "Dosan" or "Good morning," and then usually complimenting them on the thing that we notice. So whether it's a hat or their really cool Nikes, we'll ask them a bit more about that item. because those items usually can lead to a story, like where they're from, what they did before they retired, maybe their grandparent or their grandkid or child that got it for them. And then we also ask them, secrets to a happy life. That's kind of how we always enter interviews. And yeah, it takes a lot of persistence. Most of the time we will get rejected, but with some luck and some help from a Cantonese translator, we're able to connect with some people. And how we kind of end these interactions, sometimes it's a 5-minute conversation, sometimes it's 30 seconds. So after we kind of interview them, we'll then ask them to take a photo.
So yeah, the photo is really the last piece. And sometimes even we'll be able to talk to folks and they'll say, oh, we could talk to you all day, but they'll still decline the photo. So, but if we are lucky enough to snag one, we try to get their info along with having them sign a release. And that way we can send them like a physical print as a thank you, which I think they really appreciate. And I try to get a lot of variety of photos. So you'll see there's portraits like close up and full length, and then details of anything that catches our eye. Sometimes we'll see secret pockets on the inside of jackets and just little hand stitched details. So try to get to highlight those as well. And if possible, a lot of the time, if possible, we'll try to do a house visit and follow up and perhaps do a longer sit down interview. But a lot of the encounters are very brief and fleeting. So we might meet them, it's common to meet them at a bus stop. So they're, about ready to hop on the bus, and sometimes that has to end the conversation. So we get asked, what are the reactions to this project from the seniors? A lot of times when we approach them, they're feeling a bit shy, or maybe they're just private or just taken aback that we're so interested and curious about them. So as I'll mention, our success rate can be pretty low, about 10%, although we found in Vancouver, we had about a 70% success rate. So that was encouraging. And we've been getting notes, with the book out, we've been getting notes and, DMs from a lot of actually grandchildren or children of the people on our Instagram or in the book, and just excited that to spot their own family in there. And it's been pretty heartwarming, the responses we've had. And, if anyone sees their grandparents, just let us know, send us a note, and I'd be happy to send you a copy of the image. And here we have a photo of Val and her grandma in San Francisco.
So we want to share some of the people that we met, styles that we saw, and stories that we came across. So first up are the Jungs in Chinatown, LA. And they were exercising in this park in LA Chinatown. And you'll see the photo when it comes up, but they're wearing these really bright yellow jumpsuits. I don't know if you've seen it, but in a lot of parks where there's a lot of Chinese elders, you'll see them exercising and doing like small little movements. And so Mrs. Jung has been teaching a group of people for about 40 years. I only think about exercising, I never actually do it. So I definitely find inspiration in her habits. And yeah, they've had these sweatsuits for decades, but it doesn't even look a day old.
And here we have Dorothy G Kwok, who was born and raised in San Francisco, Chinatown, and she currently lives there. And what we love about this outfit is that it shows her own family's history in the outfit. So she grew up in a really big family with lots of siblings, and her dad for work in, I'm guessing, the early 1940s, he worked as a rice delivery person, delivering these 50 and 100-pound sacks of rice all around Chinatown. So she had actually saved some of these now heirloom rice sacks back when they were made out of fine cotton. And as you can see, it was a really big bag, like easily it could have been 100 pounds because it covers her, her full body. But she designed and created this special dress. She created it for special occasions and specifically film premieres, because she, as one of her many careers, I think this is maybe her 7th or 8th, she is now a consultant working as a researcher and historian for a few San Francisco Chinatown documentaries, which we can add links in the chat a little bit later. So yeah, this beautiful dress is a reflection of her own family's history.
This is someone that we call the Tailor because although he was happy to speak to us and have his portrait taken, he didn't want to give his name. So we call him the Tailor because he did that for a living at one point, along with being a cobbler, a shoe cobbler. And he made all these tender little adjustments and customizations to his clothes. So if you look at the hat, he had combined 2 hats and created all these layers for extra warmth. And he also added like a 1/2 inch to his sleeve, just like little tweaks here and there. And he expressed to us that he was frustrated that younger people don't necessarily spend time chatting with senior citizens. And he left us with a proverb. He said, basically, you know, the sunset will set on you as well. Like one day you will become old. And what we took from that was, you know, to treat senior citizens the way we want to be treated. Like when I'm 80, I want a gaggle of women coming up to me, telling me I look amazing and asking to take my photo. But for us, it's really just like something as simple as saying hello, Joseon, good morning, or Popo Holeng, which means dang, grandma, you look good. So yeah, a very good takeaway from the Tailor.
And this is Mr. Wu, who we affectionately dubbed the One. And that's because we had heard about him. He had quite the reputation with his style before we actually had met him. So he tends to favor red and yellow suits that I have a feeling are custom made for him. And you can see he has these handmade elements as well, these necklaces and accessories that are actually, they look sort of like a bunch of other necklaces combined that he has around his neck. And we met him one day after we were out shooting, and we plopped down really hungry after we got some takeout dim sum at this little takeout spot. And who should be sitting next to us but the One? And so we started bugging out because we had been just hoping to meet him all these weeks, and there he was. And what he told us was, when you're young, you don't have to care about fashion, but when you're old, you have to.
And here's our first one from Vancouver, Chinatown. We had such a blast there because the Chow sisters, June and Doris, you know, led the way and introduced us to so many wonderful people, including Miss Hui, who in a documentary that was filmed in Vancouver, Chinatown said, you know, I'll live with my kids when I'm old. She still wanted to live independently. And we love that she didn't consider herself to be old. She had so much energy, which she puts into volunteering. There's a Chinese library in Vancouver, Chinatown, where there's books donated, you know, Chinese language books that people can check out and hang out there. And she, you know, regularly volunteers there. And she says that, you know, she does receive government support. And so it's important for her to give back. And that's just one of the many ways that she does.
This is Mr. Guan, who we met in San Francisco. And his story in the book is titled Random Act of Kindness. So I was really curious about his hat, which, you know, is pretty on trend as a 5-panel Obey brand cap that had sort of like a Central South American kind of textile to it, and also matched his button-up shirt perfectly. And he told us a really sweet story that it was, he was getting off the bus one day in San Francisco, and it was started to pour rain. And this kind stranger on the bus was like, "Hey, or take my hat," and because he had forgotten his umbrella for the day. So that was a really touching story for that particular hat.
These are the Yees who we met in LA Chinatown, and we saw them from across the street. So we made a beeline and we just like ran across, and their outfits totally popped on this like gray day in LA. And we just loved all the colors. They're wearing many, many layers, like a lot of senior citizens do to keep warm. And we love the textures. Like they're both wearing like taffeta textured blazers and pants. And Mrs. Yi got her Madras blazer from her daughter who moved to college. And we see that a lot in Chinatown fashion. Part of the reason why it's so interesting is because it's a patchwork of eras and textures. So like something from Hong Kong that they got made 30 years ago combined with, say, their daughter's blazer in like the 2000s. And they met through a matchmaker. And we could tell they're pretty synced up.
And I think you can tell here they're each wearing minimum 6 layers, even in Los Angeles.
And one thing we always do is check the socks, because Chinatown pretty outfits are kind of like a story, and the socks are often the kicker or the punchline. Case in point, this woman that we met in Ross Alley, which is in San Francisco, Chinatown. When we asked her to lift up her fleece pant leg, she had socks that said, "My favorite salad is wine," which blew our minds.
And that concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for inviting us to participate, and we look forward to answering some of your questions.
Thank you.
Wonderful, Valerie, Andrea. Just some housekeeping items. I have a few questions to ask, and then if you're in the audience, please do send your questions in the chat box, and we will be more than happy to have Andrea and Valerie answer them. But before I do, I'm always struck by the beauty of landscapes of Chinatown. My good friend Jim Wong Chu had did a book on Chinatown Ghost, which is landscapes of Chinatown in the 70s and 80s. And your book is wonderful in that it's about the seniors, but how also they're part of the community, and they're just much more. They all have a story, and you're sort of telling that story through the photographs. But behind you, I find it very interesting as well. It's a story behind you as well in terms of how you selected the photos. I'm always struck by the type of photos and images people use in their Zoom background always has a story behind it. Could you share with us the stories behind you, Andrea and Valerie?
Yeah, mine is from a grocery store, probably in San Francisco, Chinatown. Their fruit and vegetable setups are so picturesque. We're always shooting photos of like bok choy and cabbage whenever we're there.
And my background is from a deli in Oakland, Chinatown called Come On. They serve a lot of banh mi and Chinese Vietnamese foods. And I actually keep this background on for non-Chinatown pretty talks. And I don't know if everyone understands what's going on, but I just figure if you know, you know. And I love the setup with like the old school boots. And it got cut off a bit, but she actually has like a sandwich gallery, all these framed photos of the different kinds of banh mi. So, there's like a dozen kinds, so you can just reference the gallery when you want to place your order.
It's beautiful, Andrea. It's sort of like you're walking up to me from your table at the back, and you're talking to me. So it's a beautiful picture there. Our festival is an Asian Canadian festival. We decided this year to have the theme of Global Asian, really focusing on Asian Anglophone literature. And we really wanted to have the inspiration of the Asian Canadian experience, not necessarily contained within Canada, where we interact and we have friends and family in the United States and throughout the world, not just Asia, but throughout the world. So we wanted to have a festival that really encompassed writers and authors from other parts of the world as well. So it really struck me that your book was not just American Chinatowns, but also Canadian as well. Can you tell us sort of why you decided on Vancouver, and you showed one of the photos of a pawpaw from and her sister here in Vancouver. Can you tell us a little bit of the story of your travels to Vancouver and why you decided to have us in your book?
When we first started the project, we were mostly in San Francisco, Chinatown, and of course, Oakland, which is just across a bridge. And then for fun, we had also stopped by LA, traveled there together, and shot and interviewed people, and then New York as well. And when we got this book deal a few years ago, our publishers definitely wanted us to expand kind of our reach in like different kinds of Chinatowns. So we basically had two others to visit or to choose, and we chose Chicago because it's in the middle of the country in the U.S., Midwest Chinatown, and that was a great experience. It's a quieter and smaller Chinatown, and we also, like Vancouver, had a really high success rate where most of the people were open to speaking with us, probably because it's not so busy. There's like more room on the street. And then we wanted to go to Canada, and there's a huge, as you guys know, a huge Chinese population in Vancouver. And it's also a city that's close to my heart because my step-grandmother, Anna Lee, lives in Burnaby. So I would go there, during her birthdays, usually in the summer.
That's really interesting. You mentioned there's that connection there. There's a family connection. So this whole Asian Canadian, Asian American experience is very, very much interrelated, and the histories are so much tied together. That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that with us. Is that how you met? How did you meet Doris and June Chow? Is it through sort of your connections that you met them, or what was the story behind that?
I think we'll have to go through some old emails to figure out the connection.
I actually can't remember anymore. Yeah, but I can, I'll do a quick screen share. Oh, I was actually going to share that last slide from our talk. I don't know if I can pull it up anymore, but both of those photos, the photos of the woman with the big sunglasses and then the three friends who are waving, they're all from Vancouver, Chinatown, and we worked with Doris and June and their organization, as well as the Yarrow Intergenerational Society for Justice. I think that's the complete name.
Wow, you remembered it all, yeah.
Yeah, we were really impressed with the organization by the younger generation going on there, and also just the intergenerational activities like hot and noisy mahjong night. That was definitely a highlight of our time in Vancouver, seeing multiple generations playing ping pong and mahjong on like a beautiful summer evening in the middle of Chinatown outside. So kudos to all the organizations doing the work in Vancouver.
That's a lovely story. I mentioned June and Doris because they oftentimes are the ones that introduce people to Chinatown. My grandmother had lived in a Meiwa Hotel in Chinatown throughout the 80s and 90s. So as a young boy, I visited her, and played in the Meiwa Hotel in the creaky staircase. And as a young kid, I was just fascinated by the smells and just the whole history of that. But, Chinatown was just a place that I went there to shop and visit grandma. And June and Doris gave me a tour of Chinatown. And it wasn't until that tour a few years ago that I really got to see it as a whole picture. So that's why I mentioned them as people that would be the right ones to go to in terms of meeting the popos, because they have a good grasp of Chinatown. Now, you mentioned intergenerational, Andrea and Valerie, in terms of Vancouver's Chinatown, but also struck by a conversation that you've had in the past in terms of how you notice that in particular Chinatowns, those that have a more community involvement or engagement with the people there tend to have a vitalization or revitalization compared to those that aren't, that might be more gentrified, or the Chinatowns might not necessarily be more community oriented. Can you speak to the differences across the 6 Chinatowns that you've gone to? Were there any differences among them, and also some of the Chinatowns that perhaps you visited that weren't profiled in the book?
I think what's so great about Chinatowns, right, is that they're almost everywhere. And we've been lucky to go to a few. And in each one, there's at least one organization, is usually 2 or 3 or 5, that are holding it down. They're the ones that like hold mahjong socials and like make sure seniors are getting hot meals during COVID, and doing such a wide range of work, whether it's just like showing love and like providing company, to making sure there's affordable housing, making sure that like downtown isn't encroaching, and trying to like develop in these neighborhoods meant to be landing pads for immigrants. So a wide range of work, a lot of props to all the organizations. And in the back of our book, we acknowledge the ones that we worked with, because they're the ones doing the heavy lifting, and oftentimes are the first people we reach out to whenever we go to a new city. But even if there are Chinatowns where maybe not as many people live there compared to San Francisco or New York, there's still people holding it down and continuing to advocate and protect and also celebrate.
I want to come back to this term, Asian Canadian and Asian American. Growing up in Vancouver, to me, I was just Canadian, and then later on, this identity finding, trip of Asian Canadian and this whole journey. Growing up where you both have been in the United States, what's your sort of what was your journey in terms of Asian American, and as you've come to Vancouver and other places in the world, Asian Canadian, does it resonate with you? I mean, what are your thoughts about this whole moniker of Asian Canadian, Asian American?
Well, I can speak to my own, I guess, journey as an Asian American. I did not grow up around a lot of other Asian Americans, and at the time, my parents speak Chinese, but they just didn't. They wanted me to assimilate, I think, or that was the mode of thinking at the time, is that if we teach you Chinese and English, then you're going to get confused. Of course, now I think they wish they had taught me more Chinese. So I don't speak Cantonese as they do, and not growing up around a lot of Asians in those communities, I think I wasn't as in touch with it until I moved to Los Angeles area for high school. So that was quite the culture shock, actually, because I had moved from Anchorage, Alaska, and I moved to San Gabriel Valley, which is the school I was at was probably 60% Asian, or Chinese specifically. So that, I think that's where I actually maybe overthought my identity so much, because there's a lot of segregation at the time in my school. So yeah, that was something I had thought a lot about since high school. And after I graduated college, I got involved with Hyphen Magazine, which I think is still around, but it's an American magazine. It was a volunteer run, actually, and it's about Asian American culture, politics, art, and issues. And I think just working with the people on that team and putting out a publication like that, which was so sorely, I think, needed at that time. There wasn't a lot of media or publication you could read, or any magazines, or many magazines about Asian America. So that really sort of solidified my connection to my own Asian Americanness. And also this project has really helped me connect in that way, especially to my grandparents' generation, and seeing how the stories that we've learned from the seniors in this project, how their immigration journeys and their stories really overlap with my own family history, has been really eye-opening.
That's a great question. It's definitely a journey. And starting out in elementary school in Sunnyvale, which is a suburb in the Bay Area, I didn't really think about it. I remember picking up a book on the Vietnam War and being like, oh, this relates to me. because my family they're all from Vietnam. They're all refugees, but we didn't really learn about it in school. And there's still so much that I need to learn or don't know about their own histories, their own personal histories, as well as, the Vietnam and American history of the war. In college, not so much either, because it wasn't a big Asian community in Santa Cruz where I went to school. I think it really began with Rice, Paper, Scissors, the Vietnamese pop-up restaurant. It became the way in which I engaged with my grandmother. Like, we would cook, she would share recipes and stories, and it became the thing I thought about and investigated. We checked out all the Vietnamese cookbooks in the library, and I think kept them for so long, they were like overdue, and we couldn't return them because it was too expensive. And luckily I met the head librarian and was able to clear the slate. I was like, please, can you clear my record? And we did that for 10 years and really got into, she's Chinese, my business partner, Katie. So really got into Chinese, Vietnamese, and Asian American culture through food. And we would blog about it through underground dinners where we would create experiences around a certain region of Vietnam, or dim sum brunch. And that was our portal to Asian American culture, learning it for ourselves and sharing it with other people through food, which is super fun. And then Chinatown Pretty, since 2014. And also learned a lot about Chinatown, and Asian American culture through that lens as well. And then over the course of the past 10 years, between Rice, Paper, Scissors and Chinatown Pretty, creating a community of friends and makers, whether it's a jewelry designer, clothing designer, who are all Asian American. And it's so great that we can connect, are doing creative things and are also Asian American. And what the analogy that I often think about, it's like you create your own tea bag. I think growing up, there was one flavor that I drank because it was my suburban flavor, usually really just kind of American or white dominant culture. And then as I got older, I found different inspiration points. I'm going to do this Vietnamese food, but I'm going to kind of set it up in a warehouse in the Mission, which is a neighborhood in SF, and kind of do it my way. It's you create your own little custom tea bag that then you got to share with everyone else.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting, both your journeys as growing up where in the United States. I was struck that somewhere I mentioned in reading your work, and that 90% of the people you have come across had rejected you when you asked them for interviews and photographing them. But however, for that 10%, this is a question from the audience, from Wiley. She asked, what was your icebreaker question when you approached a senior for the first time? And there's a follow-up question to that, but you can start off with this one.
It's usually what they're wearing and what drew us in. So it could be their Supreme hat or their two-piece matching suit. I'm actually wearing my grandma's tonight, Anna Lee, who lived in Burnaby. And then from there, we let it evolve naturally. They're outside grocery shopping usually. So hey, how's your day going? What are you up to? And then depending on how much time we have, it's sometimes 30 seconds, sometimes it's 5 minutes. We ask them what they did before they retired, where they immigrated from. And then lastly, what's the secret to a happy life?
As a follow-up to that, what difference did you see between men and women in terms of style and fashion? Did you find a difference between the two genders?
With the exception of, we definitely showed you the one who is pretty flashy, and I think he dresses with a lot of intention. I would say that the men tend to be a little more muted in color, but often have really cool details, maybe 2 different hats on or interesting layers. So they have their own special accessories and things that we hone in on. But we sometimes call the men in San Francisco monochrome men because they tend to wear either all gray, all khaki, like a fisherman's vest with, khakis. And they tend to dress more tonal, which is interesting. So there's some of those in the book as well they're more subdued, but there's cool details if you look for them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. I have a comment and a question from Michael here in the audience. Michael says, first off, thank you for creating and documenting these gorgeous photos. The images remind me so much of my Papuan Indian and take me back to such a special moment in my childhood. So thank you, he says. Question is, curious to know if you saw any regional fashion trends between Canada and US or West Coast versus East Coast as an example.
Michael, thank you for the comment. You know, a lot of people who live in Chinatowns come from Hong Kong or southern parts of China. And for whatever reason, a lot of them brought a lot of this, they kind of share the same distinct style. So floral patterns with a puffy jacket, maybe with a hat that was gifted to them. So it's very kind of patchworky, a lot of pattern clashing, a lot of color. But in terms of differences between cities, we think New York has a little bit more black. Like I think of a black puffer jacket when I think of New York. Andrea, do you want to share some other observations?
A small observation we noticed was in Chicago, which is nicknamed the Windy City, because it's very windy, is that, you know, we see a lot of bucket hats and bonnets in Chinatowns, but theirs all had these hand sewn in straps or ribbons that go under their chin. And we actually asked like, oh, what's up with what's up with the chin straps? And they said, well, literally our hats will blow away if we don't do this. So that was just a common thread throughout most of the outfits in Chicago Chinatown. But we do find in the Bay Area, in San Francisco especially, which is known for its fog and fast changing weather and microclimates, that there's perhaps more layers in San Francisco, which create, you know, that patchwork effect even more with all the contrasts and juxtapositions of textiles. So I think that's one of the things we first noticed when we were out about in San Francisco is just the sheer amount of layers. So I think the most that we've ever encountered on an outfit was maybe, Valerie, was it like 11, 9, 10, 11 layers? So just a ridiculous amount going on.
This question has to do with writing and publishing, where there's a literary festival and I'm a librarian. So I'd be remiss not to ask you something about the publishing world that might be of interest for writers and authors out there. Can you tell us how it got started? You had this tutorial blog and you chronicled these stories, but how did you get started in terms of the idea of turning this into a book? And any tips for writers and authors out there that want to do something similar or just don't know where to get started?
Yeah, we started this project as a one-off article for an online magazine called The Bold Italic. So we were like, oh, let's pitch this story. We want to know more about these outfits. So we spent a few months around like the Lunar New Year of 2014, interviewing and photographing, and we probably got like 8 people, and it did really well. People really responded to it, and then after that we're like, all right, that's done. And a year later, Chinatown Community Development Center, which is a nonprofit in SF Chinatown that supports, celebrates, advocates for senior citizens, reached out and asked us to do a photo show, like a photo exhibit, and that kind of catalyzed our project. We're like, oh, all right, well, I guess we'll start an Instagram and we'll start a blog. And we shot for the show and then just kept doing it. I think we were just driven by the people we're meeting, and then also the ethos of all these nonprofits of like preserving Chinatown. And we wanted to do our part by preserving the stories or documenting the stories and the fabulous people that live in these neighborhoods. And we did this for 5 years. So I think over the course of our 7-year project, we've probably gone out once a month. And it's usually for 3 hours at a time. And then at a certain point, we're like, oh, we have enough for a book. So we reached out to a publisher, Chronicle Books, which does a lot of like photo and art books, and they're based in San Francisco. And they were kind of the ideal choice and the one that ended up working out for us. And we spent 2 years working on the book. So we had a lot of content to start out with, but we also wanted to shoot for the book as well. So we spent like a year shooting, going to new places like Chicago and then Vancouver together, and then another year writing and assembling and editing and going through versions of the book.
Yeah, wonderful. This is a Sorry about that. Go ahead,
Oh,
Andrea.
I just wanted to chime in and to speak about publishing more generally if folks are just to shine a light more about the general process. So we ended up working with the agent, which you don't have to have an agent, but they can help with negotiation and just answering questions. And then they usually take a standard percentage out of any advances or fees that you might earn. And basically you can just create a book proposal. So it's like a pitch and, you know, it's a PDF, usually a PDF format, and you can send it in to these publishers. So if you do a little research, you can find out the publishers that make sense for the book's topics that you're investigating. And I think most of them have on their website like a link that you can actually submit those proposals. So it should have probably a sample of the writing, if not the finished manuscript. For us, we just had a short layout of a sample photos with sample stories. We hadn't finished the book yet. And yeah, and then hopefully you can, you know, if you have any context there, that helps as well. And we were recommended a book from our agent called, which I share with others. It was called The Essential Guide to Getting Your Book Published. And it's really just publishing 101, just breaks down like, what is an advance? What are all these terms? And just the general process. And that actually really helped just to understand, okay, what comes next after we send out the proposal, what to expect. So that'd be a great starting point if you're just curious about moving forward with it. And I always thought, you know, with a book, you know, it's such a big deal. I thought, oh, you have to be approached by the publisher. But what I've learned from doing this and with, you know, meeting other authors, it is, I think most of the time, it's actually the authors pitching the book to the publishers because they're looking for new, fresh ideas all the time. So you can actually be really proactive about it. You don't have to wait for someone to approach you.
Thank you. That's very useful advice to those who want to get started. This question is kind of related to that. So I'll read it out here from from Celine in the audience here. How many seniors did you interview, and what percentage did you include in the book? And are you going to do a second book?
Oh man, how many people have we met over the years? We did a quick tally for some elementary school kids a few months ago, and I was like, I think we've spoken to like upwards of 800 people. Or 1,000, because we've been doing this for 7 years, and 90% of the people are like, thank you, which means no thank you. So that's why it took so long, like 5 years, to kind of have enough for a collection to include in a book. And we do have a lot of content on our blog and Instagram, and then for the book we kind of culled like our favorites or ones that would be a good addition to the book, and of course we shot more as well. And then for a second book, I think for us, our book came out during the pandemic. So we want to be able to celebrate in person. That's kind of like the next phase, is like being able to meet people, share stories, go to different cities. And there's also a question about extra content. We post on our Instagram, and then our Tumblr has a lot of older content as well.
This is from Sylvie in the audience. She has a really interesting question. What is the central point you want your viewers and your readers to take away when they see your project? And what is the impact you both are hoping to make? Maybe I'll start with Valerie. Oh, sorry,
ahead,
Andrea.
Go for it, Andrea. You first.
Okay. Sylvia, thank you for this question. Gosh. Well, this project it's broad in a lot of ways. There's so many we've found with the people who are into this project and who have, come across the book and read it, that they're all taking different things from it. You don't have to be Asian American to connect with these stories from seniors. People write us all the time and who aren't Asian and just say, oh my gosh, like this reminded me so much of my grandparents as soon as I cracked it open. So we love that commonality. And I think overall, though, it's pretty incredible to get some perspective on just what older people have experienced, and especially I think in Asian culture, with most of the people we've met being immigrants, they've lived through so much. I think more than I can really fathom. Like a lot have been through war, might be refugees, might have had to leave family and children, you know, back in the old country, and had that separation. A lot have been incarcerated. I mean, the list goes on. And I think, and then coming to a new country, probably not speaking the language and starting over, it just, I don't know, there's so much strength and resilience to learn from all of those stories. And I think especially in this last year, which has been challenging for a lot of people, I think that it's a great reminder that, you know, we too will get through this. This too shall pass. And you're just going to learn so much from it in the end. And yeah, it's a reminder to get some perspective on kind of the highs and lows of my own life, and that I've learned a lot of respect for the seniors in general.
I was largely influenced by what we saw in Vancouver, like the Doris and June, the work they were doing, the Mahjong Social. I think it's a physical representation. You know, we saw blue-haired Chinese Canadians playing Mahjong with seniors in their 80s, and you don't need to know Chinese to do that. You just need to know how to play. Or even if you don't know, they'll teach you how. And that intergenerational work and connection and celebration and just play was really beautiful. So my takeaway from kind of observing the work in Vancouver was like, contribute to the Chinatowns you want to see exist, right? So if you want to see a thriving Chinatown, like shop there, show up every day or on a weekly basis, make it part of your weekly ritual. If you want seniors in your life, like start out by just saying hello. And we saw that with the Chow sisters just walking down. They can go up to a benevolent association while they're playing Mahjong, or just like say hi to people they recognize on the street. So for me, it's building relationship, not only with the neighborhood, but with the people in it.
A question from Jocelyn. This one returns to the book. How did you choose the cover photo, especially with all the beautiful photos that you have and that you've taken? Maybe start with Valerie.
So Monta is a very special woman. She's on the cover. When I lived in SF Chinatown, I was lucky to live there for 6 months. I would sit at this cafe and see people get off the bus when I was journaling, you know, just sitting in the cafe writing. And she had on these green Keds, these jade sneakers that caught my eye. And when I scanned up, you know, I realized it was someone like in their 70s or 80s with a silver bob. Like her outfit looked so hip and straight out of Urban Outfitters. I was just like, oh my God, who is this person? So in a lot of ways, she became our Cinderella story. And we actually met her when we were out shooting for our first article. And she became a friend, like someone we would say hi to whenever we saw in the neighborhood, someone that would always hold hands with us because we couldn't speak the same language. And often our translator couldn't even communicate with her because she spoke Tosanese. And she came to our show opening in Chinatown and wore this beautiful outfit and had a red carpet moment where she pulled up in a minivan in like the smallest of alleyways. So that's Monta. If Andrea, you want to share a bit about Bok Chu on the back.
Sure. So on the back here is Buck, who we nicknamed Butterfly Buck, because as you can see, or not, he's wearing this tie with a bunch of butterflies on it. And we found out that he has a collection of about 40 of these very colorful ties. And this photo was taken in Portsmouth Square, which is sort of the living room of SF Chinatown where people hang out and play card games. And it's kind of a plaza / park. And there he was in his white gloves and his fedora, like by the playground. And he was super sweet and open to talking. And he always carried around this, you know, one of those mini photo albums with him that had photos of his family and his children. And he spoke a little bit of English, but he would just kind of show off his family And he was super proud that, they were engineers, and he loved to show off, photos. And then later on, when we would met him, he would break out the photo album again. And we actually noticed that he had included the photos that we had sent him, the portraits, so we made it into the photo album. But to go back to kind of how we chose the photos, it was tricky. We actually had a lot of iterations for the cover. The photos, we love this photo of Monta and thought it said a lot. And of course, the memory is a really dear one to us. But we weren't sure, just for the cover design in general, just like the colors, the type, the little banding details on this little belly band with the pattern. There was tons of back and forth. I mean, there must have been, I don't know, dozen versions that we went through or were considering or had feedback on. So, or way more than a dozen. So, every little detail was considered on the cover, and we are really pleased with it. And even like the color on the interior, there's like a mint green, all of that was, we weighed in on and wanted to recommend to the designer who worked at Chronicle. So we're really happy that we settled on like a larger photo, because I think it really speaks to what the project is and draws people in, because it's not often that you see a photo of a Asian senior citizen on a book, right? I think in hindsight, this was the right choice, because that would definitely draw me in. And I think we just don't get that kind of representation, or that generation might not either. And so in the vein of books that came before us, like Advanced Style, we just thought that a nice portrait would be the way to go.
We're running up against time here, so I just wanted to thank you both, Valerie and Andrea, for sharing your time with us and sharing your stories, and giving us advice in terms of how we tell our stories, and whether we want to publish it or have it ourselves, in terms of documenting them on using our photos. Thank you for your time, and I wish you the best of luck in terms of continuing your journey and future projects as well. I hope we get to keep in touch and see each other in person as well when this all is over. It's kind of an odd time to do a festival online, but it's really opened up our opportunities to really meet one another and be able to have a festival that have authors from across the world in North America and different time zones and different geographies. So thank you. On behalf of everyone here at Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, the LiterASIAN Festival in Vancouver, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.